increasingly picking up, and in some of these pointed questions today, is as we are auditing and reviewing the various license bodies, some of these questions are surfacing, and we are happy that today we have people that could make reference to what is best practice in other organizations. I mean, the suggestion by both Peter and Johan points to that. What I will be covering now is specifically the standard requirements as it relates to ECSA recognized license bodies. Forgive me if I will be reading some of the items as they appear on the slide, because I'm referring now to the specifics within the standard. So what are the roles and responsibilities of ECSA recognized license bodies? We say that delegated power is to verify CPD service providers and to validate Category 1 activities. And that's basically the quality assurance function that ECSA is delegating to these license bodies. And they are expected to ongoingly, over the period of 3 years, that they are recognized by ECSA, to also monitor and audit the verified CPD service providers as and when they require. Now, that could be a trigger through a query. Does this particular service providers, are they verified by this particular license body? Or this particular activity, is it a validated activity by that particular license body? And we make reference to a period of 3 years that relates to the period that ECSA would be recognizing a license body. It's important now to note that CPD license bodies, the ECSA recognized license bodies, cannot verify themselves as CPD providers. Because ECSA delegates that authority, ECSA also assumes the responsibility of verifying the recognized license body as a CPD service provider. Ansel, your question to this, I hope that clarifies it again. And as ECSA, we verified the service provision to the standard requirements. And I will cover those specific items for the two types of license bodies that we recognize as ECSA. If a provider recognizes both a license body and a service provider, it may validate its own activities. So again, back to ECSA recognizes the license body. The license body may become a service provider. That is a process that ECSA engages in and verifies that license body as a service provider, CPD service provider. Around its activities, it can validate its own activities. Now, I'm sure there will be questions around how it can do that, what are the processes. And Paul will cover that in the next few slides. So the criteria for the appointment as an ECSA recognized CPD license body. There are two groups of license bodies that we recognize as ECSA. It would be voluntary associations as well as higher education institutions. And this applies when it comes to higher education institutions. These could be private or public. Now, higher education institutions offering engineering programs are typically accredited by the Council of Higher Education and ECSA when we accredit the various programs that they would have on offer. Now, as far as voluntary associations is concerned, and it is not covered in the standard, ECSA recognizes various voluntary associations on application in terms of Section 25 of the EPA Act. So those are the two types of licensed bodies that we would recognize. They'd either be voluntary associations that we have recognized in terms of Section 25 of the Engineering Professions Act, or they are accredited CHE, and ECSA accredited higher education institutions, both private as well as public. Now, for voluntary associations, what are the specific ECPD standard defined requirements? Should a voluntary association wish to be ECSA recognized, they would need to complete the ECPD 8 application form, which is available on the ECSA website. Second criteria is that we would like to have that voluntary association to have an appropriately equipped head office or infrastructure that must be accessible to all potential CPD service providers that may apply for verification with that license body. In the case here being that it is a voluntary association. There must be a CPD administrator that must be able to adequately support the verified CPD service providers, as well as being able to validate those CPD activities of these CPD service providers that will apply to that licensed body, voluntary association, to become CPD service providers. There must be registration within the relevant category as well as discipline. Obviously, an operational website that lists the verified CPD providers as well as the activities that the licensed body would have validated in terms of the standard. And if it is, in this case, it being a voluntary association, there would need to be compliance with Board Notice 60, which of 2007, which basically defines the requirements of recognition as a voluntary association. Lastly, for voluntary association would be that they would need to submit evidence of how the licensed body would verify the challenge of cost that is associated with being CPD service providers, as well as the validation of activities. Meeting all these 7 requirements would allow a voluntary association to become a recognized licensed body. To Group 2 of recognized licensed bodies, these are the higher education institutions that are both private and public. They need to complete the ECPD 8 form. And they would need to prove that they are indeed accredited with the Council of Higher Education for their engineering programs.
Ivan, I just thought of maybe this is appropriate time to pause. I see that there was a hand up. I think it was you.
Yes, it was me.
Yep.
If we could go back to the previous slide, please. Point number 7, submission and proposed cost for verifying CPD service providers and CPD validated activities. For the sake of clarification, are you saying that, let's use a voluntary association, could charge a fee for a service provider to be validated by the recognized voluntary association over and above the CPD activities? CPD activities is easy. The training provider submits it, they pay a fee to get it validated. We appoint a review to have a look at it. That fee covers the administration, but also pays the fee for the reviewer to do the actual work. So that one is fine. I'm just not sure about this, the CPD service providers.
Yeah. Do you want me to come in there?
Yes, you may.
Yeah. So we've left that provision in there. Of course, we are requesting that the VAs, apply their minds around how they do this. I mean, at this point in time, we haven't really had costs for CPD service providers, but maybe there is a reason that we may have omitted from the standard, or that we haven't have foreseen. But if VAs would like to charge for verification in whatever way, we are not sure how you would justify that at this point. But at this point, most of the proposed cost would be for the validation of activities. But if you do want to charge for verification, we have left that open.
Okay, then that's going to be interesting.
But if there's at this point we haven't seen any. But and the reason that we asked for the proposal of those costs, that if you are charging, is that we want to have a view of it. And one of the rationales for having a view of it is that we would also, want to find out what your rationale for charging is, because as far as possible, we want to reduce the overall cost to our, registered persons in some way. And so we've if there is any any licensed body that is charging for this, we would like to be aware of it, and then we could follow up on that aspect. That was the rationale why we included it. But if you have any additional comments there, Johan, you can make them, and we would take that into consideration.
Thank you.
All right. And if I could add to that, it really would be to, like you say, Yashin, to minimize the potentially prohibitive cost associated with CPD. And with 47 recognized licensed bodies currently, should potential service providers view cost associated with verification being prohibitive, they may just be spoiled for choice and go elsewhere. But that's something that we would like to assist with.
If I may be so rude to interject, I'm all for competition, but I think service providers are going to look at who's the cheapest, and they're going to submit all their material, all their CPD material through to that specific one if there's a cost involved. So I don't have the answer yet, because what we did with SACNA is there's no cost involved. You register your service provider, you go through the validation process, and you only get charged for the actual validation of the CPD material. So that's what's done on that side. So I don't have the answer, but I think it's an interesting debate.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Johan. For the higher education institutions, again, it is the completion of the application form. And unlike VAs, higher education institutions must be accredited by the Council of Higher Education for their specific engineering programs. Head office that is adequately equipped with a CPD administrator in the relevant school or faculty. And then a structure where the engineering programs or courses would be offered. And again, it would be within that school or faculty or department. And there must be evidence of adequate support to verify CPD service providers and the validation of CPD activities, as would be the case for VAs. Again, the appropriate registration category as well as discipline, a functional and operational website where marketing of activities as well as the listing of verified CPD service providers would appear. And this is something that is of huge interest for the registered person as they are accumulating their CPD points through activities. They really want to see service providers being verified as well as them doing validated activities. And ongoingly, as the standards is implemented in line with the renewal, the compulsory renewal of registration being linked to CPD, increasingly this will become important for the registered person. And again, the last point, which is related to the cost of those two processes of verification of service providers as well as the validation of activities. So typically, when we cover the audit and review process of the licensed bodies, these are the requirements that we would audit and review with the licensed body when we do level 4. So what does the licensing process entail? For any higher education institution that offers the accredited programs that wishes to become a recognized licensed body, they must submit the form as well as the supporting documents that were previously identified in slides in slides 18 and 17. 18 in the case of higher education institution. And then ECSA reviews the application and checks the requirements against criteria that has been defined. And if there are any additional requirements or outstanding documents, ECSA would inform the higher education institution of those outstanding requirements. If the applicant meets all those requirements and criteria, ECSA issues the license with a unique license number, and that recognition is valid for a 3-year period. And a site visit may be included as part of the licensing process, and that would be and that is usually finalized, submitted to the task team as well as the high impact committee for approval. So the validity period remains 3 years. And again, the issuing of the certificate, we always expect recognized licensed bodies to display the recognition certificate within their premises or on the website that they would use for their own marketing purposes. And the renewal process, when we do the audit and review towards the end of the 3-year period, would be that we audit and review and we check compliance against those requirements as well as criteria that have been identified during the application process. And all recognized licensed bodies are published. And as I indicated earlier, we are currently having 47 recognized licensed bodies, and that list is updated regularly as we approve or recognize new applicants. So one of the responsibilities of ECSA is the reviewing and monitoring of licensed bodies that have been recognized by it, and ECSA reserves the right to inspect premises to verify the information that is submitted during the application stage, and we choose to do that during the application stage as well as soon after that, and we verify information that is submitted during application. And as indicated, if additional information is required, we usually request the applicant to do that. So what happens if false information is submitted or there's failure to resolve deficiencies during the application stage? ECSA would notify the applicant in writing of deficiencies, and ECSA would also advise what kind of correction action should be implemented by the applicant to rectify those shortcomings or deficiencies. And if the applicant cannot correct those deficiencies within the communicated timelines, ECSA has the right to revoke that the recognition license. And if it has been revoked by ECSA, it is incumbent upon the applicant to notify all relevant stakeholders, which will include, in my opinion, CPD service providers that may have been verified or may be seeking verification with that licensed bodies. And then it's also incumbent upon the applicant to remove all from its platforms, which will include websites or certificates that may have been on display at head office by the date that would have been indicated by ECSA. As we know, there are occasional changes in information, relocation of head office premises, changes in websites, etc. So we require the CPD licensed body, the recognized licensed body, to inform ECSA about any changes as they were contained in the original application form. And we request as ECSA that the licensed body do that within 21 days of any material change to the original application form. And that's just assists us as ECSA to better support our recognized licensed bodies.
Okay, so Ivan, if I could just come in, I see a hand up by Johan. There was a comment by Kevin, which I will address a little later. But I see a hand by Johan.
Yeah, just a quick question, Ivan. I don't see anywhere it talks about costing. Would there any costs involved for licensing bodies to apply to ECSA, the voluntary associations of universities? Do they have to pay a fee to go through this process?
There is none at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I'm not sure whether I covered this. Yes. Occasionally, and these are not frequent, we may anticipate changes to requirements for recognition as a licensed bodies. And then if this happens and it becomes necessary, ECSA informs all licensed bodies of the proposed amendments prior to it being implemented. And we typically would call for input from all stakeholders, and in this case, it would be all recognized licensed bodies. And those comments are considered by ECSA and may be included in the proposed amendments that are anticipated by ECSA. And then we, as ECSA, we would inform licensed bodies of those anticipated or planned changes within reasonable time frames. And those, if they have any impact on processes embarked upon by recognized licensed bodies, those time frames would take that into account. Appeals processes for licensed bodies, if licensing requirements are not met, typically ECSA would decline the application and inform the applicant in writing of such decline. If the applicant is not satisfied with the application outcome, there is a right to appeal to ECSA by the applicant. And that would be obviously duly lodged by the applicant in writing, and ECSA would follow the appeal process as defined in the CPD standard. Before I move on to the next section, which is the verification of CPD service providers, I'm sure there would be questions. If there are any on your side, Yashin, I'm not able to see.
Yes, there are two questions. The first one is around. Okay, sorry, I'm just battling to read this. But the first one is around are CPD service providers to be approved for a period of 3 years? Okay, and the second one is I can see the list of, okay, this is from Johan. I can see the list of CPD licensed bodies on the ECSA website, but no mention of approved CPD providers. Are CPD licensed bodies notified if a CPD service provider application is submitted via the VA?
Okay, so maybe let me deal with the first one, and I'll come back to the two. Yes, the period of recognition for recognized licensed bodies is 3 years, and that is extended to the verified CPD service providers. So the period remains 3 years as well for verified CPD service providers. And then on the second question, do not see, I think, Corina, you may update. We receive, remember what we do as ECSA, we verify licensed bodies that may want to become service providers. And that is a separate process to the recognition of licensed bodies. And not all licensed bodies want to become, whether they are VAs or higher education institution, want to become service providers. So to date, the task team has approved, I think, you'll correct me, Corina, I think there's about 13 verified CPD service providers who happen to be licensed bodies. And that list, as we receive applications, we consider them at task team level and make recommendations to our impact committee for approval. That is a number that we expect to grow as we implement the standard continuously and as we receive more applications. And remember, what we will publish will be the recognized licensed bodies that are also verified, that we have verified as CPD service providers, that we, being ECSA, have verified as CPD service providers. I'm not sure whether those two, whether I've adequately responded to those. The last one, Yashin, I didn't capture that well.
Okay, I see Johan's hand is up, so let me just give him the floor.
Okay, Ivan, it's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to try and unpack it in my brain while I'm talking to you. So your licensed bodies, right? That and does your voluntary associations and universities, or higher education and training, private, and then some. Specifically to your voluntary associations, most of them do their own training as well, as far as I know, which by default makes them service providers as well. Question number one, it's not a double application, is it? Because surely if you become a licensed body and you do your own CPD training, therefore you sort of accepted that you are doing that. Do they have to, number one, do another application to become a service provider? That's question number one. And question number two, all of the service providers that's been verified by the licensing bodies, would there then also be a database on ECSA's website of all of those service providers over and above the licensing bodies?
So let me take the first one, and maybe Yashin, you can take question number 2. So yes, the two processes are separate. Application for recognition as a licensed body is a separate process and has its own requirements. So that is the voluntary association or higher education institution would apply to ECSA for recognition, and they would meet they would need to meet the 7 requirements or criteria for recognition as an ECSA licensed body. When the same licensed body wants to become a service provider, they would also need to meet a separate set of requirements, which will be covered in the next set of slides. So those processes are separate. And remember, when they apply for verification, when a licensed body applies for verification as a service provider, they are again applying to ECSA. And ECSA verifies the application according to the set criteria as per the standard. And your other comment that there are voluntary associations and higher education institutions that may be providing activities, we are certainly picking that up. But as we are implementing the standard, we would we want compliance to the standard, which is that apply for recognition as a licensed body, and if you want to become a service provider as a licensed body, apply again to ECSA for verification. After that, recognized licensed body that is also a service provider would be able to validate its own activities according to the standard, the CPD standard.
Yes, and of course also have the rights to verify other service providers that applies to become.
Spot on.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that's clear for that question.
Perfect, yeah, thank you.
Okay, on the other question, I think Corina has answered that on the chat. Okay. So you can move ahead, Ivan.
So what I will be covering now is the verification of CPD service providers. Yashin is he indicated 2 o'clock and we have 30 minutes to go. So I'm happy to continue and then maybe he'll pick up the validation of activities.
Yes, I think let's take a comment from Peter. We'll take some additional questions at this point. And I would also want to respond to 2 aspects that have been raised. I think Peter asked a question, but I'll give him the floor. And Kevin mentioned a specific aspect, and I would like to maybe, instead of addressing that at the end, I could probably deal with that now. So if Peter, if you can take the floor.
Thank you.
I know it's an online floor, but I'm not sure what to call this anymore.
Okay, I think I'm coming through, but has ECSA got the capacity to handle all these things within 3 years? Because the applications submitted take an awful long time to get answers. After going through getting the process approval for a licensed body, we found to our dismay that we had to then apply as a service provider, and we started that, and so far the process has taken probably close to 18 months and we don't have the answer yet. Thanks.
Okay, firstly, I am surprised that process took 18 months. That's very surprising. But I would like to, since I chair the task team, I would like those details, if they can be submitted to me, I would like to investigate what has happened. That's the first point. Secondly, is that I think what we have recognized as the task team now in terms of the process is that we have found that quite a number of institutions, I mean, this is generically, I'm just mentioning this, but what we have found is that processes from institutions are not readily available, more on the service provider recognition stage. What we are also doing is that, and I'd like to say this quite openly, is that the process that we've engaged on so far has not just been something new, but it's also been developmental, which means that on our side, we are also learning certain aspects. Although many of us may be equipped to have dealt with these items before in our individual capacities before, but we're also learning quite a number of aspects in this process around the monitoring aspect. For example, the way I see it today is that if we have to go through an internal approval process for renewal via two committees, we may want to make a recommendation to state otherwise for renewals. Otherwise, it becomes an aspect about quality and control again. So does it warrant that level of control to get the right level of quality? And in certain aspects, maybe not. So when it comes to your aspect about capacity, there's two issues there. One is that can we make the process more efficient? And my answer is yes, we can, based on what we've seen. But what we also recognize that for the first round is that many of the service providers and or license bodies were either not aware of the requirements or may not have been acquainted with some of the details of the documents. And we have had a lot of up and down. And when I say it was a lot, it was a substantial amount. And that has also delayed the process. And so we are now, for example, on an audit schedule, and we have now audited quite a number of different types of organizations. And we now have some recommendations based on that. And based on those recommendations, we believe that we need to start to engage more on training and clarity issues rather than compliance issues. And the nature of that is because we have found a number of, in inverted commas, non-compliance aspects in terms of the standard, which means that since the standard was promulgated, I think it's taken time for various organizations to come up to speed in terms of developing their processes. And in terms of that, there is a lag. Now, here's another lag that I thought of stating, is that the first lag that we had was when we started the process, which was around mid of last year. We started off with the licensing process, knowing fully well that organizations also do service provision. Okay, so which means that even though you're a licensed body and there's a lag in terms of the process of you being approved as a service provider. Now, we should have done both those processes at once. We decided not to. And there's a few reasons we decided not to. One, it was, I think, the capacity issue because we are starting up and we want all individuals that are involved in the review process to fully understand these processes, and we're building further capacity for that. So we will be reaching out to train additional people for capacity. But we also wanted to ensure that the licensing process is sorted out first. We did recognize that if you are a licensed body, you would also be a verified service provider in many instances. Just give me a second. I'm just going to get the phone off. So that means, so many organizations have then asked us, but we are doing service provision. And so what happens in between the process where we are a licensed body and then ECSA has not approved us as yet as a service provider, because that process came second. So do we now stop all our courses and so forth? So our stance at this point in time is that status quo applies, which means that if you had started a process prior to the acknowledgement of the standard, that whatever you have been doing before, you would continue with that process. However, we would like to make you aware of the standard so that at least if there are any deficiencies that you may have catered for, and we believe that many of them you would have covered anyway, especially the critical aspects around technical review, is that we have said that we would now engage with the process of service provision. Now, in terms of the service provision process, I just wanted to make you aware of two aspects that we have found, and maybe this is an important point for everyone to note, is that firstly is that what we found in many of the bodies that we've investigated or reviewed is that they have not documented their processes. Now remember, as ECSA, as much as we have the standard, you are obliged to run with your own processes, and we can monitor you based on your processes that you have stipulated, provided that your processes abide at least with the minimum requirements of the standard. So if we don't have, for example, a process that you have for verification of service providers, and if we don't have a process that you have for validation, and we are saying that you can, in your processes, make reference to ECSA documents. So if you are using an ECSA template for whatever reason, which we would have on our website, you need to stipulate that in your process. If you are not, and if you've adapted your own process, we also respect that. So then we would just check in terms of your processes and your templates whether they meet the minimum requirements. So hopefully I've addressed a few aspects. One is that there is a lag between recognition of licensed bodies and service provision. And we do understand that many licensed bodies have come back to us and said, yes, we've now more recently applied for service provision. One is because we didn't know, or two is that maybe ECSA didn't start the process. And yes, ECSA did not start the process. We've only started that process afterwards, okay? And we've done that deliberately. Now, there are some different requirements under both these processes for service provision and for licensed bodies. Now, I know that Ivan has only covered licensed bodies now, so I'd like him to go through the process for verification, but I also wanted to note just the following aspects, is that we do understand that you're making two applications, okay, licensed body and a verification as a service provider, but only yourself as a service provider, not the service providers that you verify. That is your process, but you expected to have a documented process for that. Now, I would just like to say that when it comes to the verification process in any event, even if you are a licensed body, and you would normally have those processes in place anyway for yourself. So all we are doing in this case is that we are creating an independence route where you're making a second application where you would be supplying those processes to ECSA at this point in time, as we have it. And in future, we may look at a different model, depending on the information we receive. Our main aim at this point in time is to ensure that we have adequate processes to apply a reasonable quality of service provisions, of courses and programs for our registered professionals. So I know I've said quite a mouthful, but hopefully I've covered a few aspects in this. Johan, I see that your hand is up again.
My hand is up again. Just something that I have to put out there, and this is, trust me, lessons that I've learned over a long period of time. One thing that ECSA should at some point consider is that systems, it's called progressive web applications, drive your processes and drive your when you start using templates and forms and Excel spreadsheets, that's a dangerous place to be operating in. And your process flow and your operational flow and your requirement flow, you build that into a web application, and it takes care of and it builds capacity, so you don't have to go through all of those kind of things. The requirements are there. You have to tick and say that you are aware of it and you know exactly what's going for what, which takes you to the next application, which will be the licensing body. Then you've got a question. Yes, I want to become a service provider as well, and you complete that. And that process is completed. The administrator gets it, validates it, and you move on. So there are tools. All I'm saying is there are tools out there that can make your life so much easier, so that you don't have to sit with these frustrations. So it's just something to consider maybe at some point.
Thank you very much for that, Johan. Johan, what we would be doing is that, I mean, this is part of the next phase, and it may be valuable for all service providers, is because I think as much as we're promoting competition and so forth in various aspects, but I think at the end of the day, it boils down to efficiency, effectiveness of our and quality of our service provision. So we would like at some stage, and we are seeing some good examples that are also coming across from some of the reviews that we have, where we have some good, automated processes based on web designs, etc. But it may also be a good learning, not just for ECSA, and I think ECSA should, and we believe to improve our efficiencies, that yes, we should move on to an online system, and maybe Corina will be able to comment on that when that will happen from the chat. But what I'd also like to say is, I think in terms of some of these best practices, if VAs and universities are willing to share across platforms what they see as, good systems, we can, and if VAs allow us to do this, is that we will be able to share what we have seen, and if there are some better practices out there, we would also like to share that with all licensed bodies. And the rationale for that is that, so if the entire system becomes efficient and effective, then I think things will start to get better with time. Anyway, that's just my comment on that aspect.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. The web application that we're developing for iPad should be done most probably by the end of the month, maybe next middle month. That's open. I will share that knowledge with you, with everybody that needs it. We can put it through the asset test, and it might just work for everybody. So I can then liaise and give a demonstration on it, and we can see how we can take it forward if you're keen on that.
Okay, we'll definitely discuss that in our committee meeting, and then we will decide on how we would proceed on this. Okay, thank you. Back over to you, Ivan. Ivan, I'm not sure if Impo has joined us.